in 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Devos Outdoor, your go-to source for lightweight, portable, and versatile lighting solutions built for the outdoors and beyond. Whether you need scene lighting for public safety emergencies or reliable area lighting for your campsite, Devos has you covered. Their LED lanterns offer variable outputs and color options with Bluetooth remote controls that provide a complete ecosystem of lighting in a compact and easy-to-deploy package. These lights are perfect for camping, hunting, search and rescue, crime scene processing, and nighttime operations. Devos optimizes your experience and alleviates your pain points with extra power banks, solar panels, and more. Devos Outdoor ensures that you have long-lasting portable lighting no matter where you are. Check out their lineup at Devos, D-E-V-O-S, outdoor.com or find them on Amazon. Again, that's Devos, D-E-V-O-S, outdoor.com. This episode was also brought to you by Loa Boots. Start your day off on the right foot with footwear that was designed for those who stand relentlessly in the face of adversity. I wear Loa every single day, for miles on canine searches and for hours on tactical operations in inclement weather. No matter what, Loa keeps me moving. Whether you run, hike, hunt, or fight, on the streets or out in the woods, Loa has the gear you need to help you conquer whatever challenges you face. Go check out their new line of trail running shoes at Loa Boots, L-O-W-A Boots.com, and get outside for some fresh air and daylight. Loa, for those who know where they're going and won't stop until they get there.
Welcome back. This is Jim. I'm here with my buddy Mike. I was reading a book a couple of months ago by a big national security mover and shaker, a counterinsurgency expert named David Kilcullen. He's Australian. He's a professor at Arizona State, among other things, so maybe we can get him on the show one of these days. And his book is called The Dragons and the Snakes, How the Rest Learn How to Fight the West. It rhymes, so you know it's good. And that book came out in 2020, which I think is interesting. A little literary foreshadowing, right? Like what could have happened next?
Big detail.
Yeah, some things have happened since then. So I read the book, or I listened to it, because that's the way I do books. I do audiobooks on my commute. And he said a couple of things in his book that kind of stuck in me. You know how every once in a while you get like an idea, like a splinter in your brain kind of thing. And I don't know really how I think about some of the things that he talked about. Some of the things I really strongly agree with. And he says some things where I'm like, ooh, yeah, he kind of nailed the essence of the problem. And then there are some things I kind of disagree with where I'm like, I don't know that there's anything I can do about that. And so I've been kind of wrestling with it, intellectually or philosophically. And I was trying to think, like, is there some point he made that has some application to law enforcement, to our audience, to concealed carriers? And I think there is. And I think it's worth diving into. As I was doing some of the research on it, I found a book report, a review on it from the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA on their official website did a report. So I'm like, I should probably read that.
What's it mean if you're an author and that happens? I feel like
it's probably a good sign. Yeah. But like, it kind of tells you about this Dave Kilcullen guy. He's the type of guy that the CIA guys read.
Right.
Right. So that just kind of informs. It doesn't mean everything he says is gospel, but it certainly informs how people like the intelligence community, the national security community think about stuff like this, right?
It stirs up some thoughts, for sure.
Yeah, so that CIA book report was written by a guy named George Lewis. I thought he did a great job. It's like a 2-page book report. We'll link to it in the show notes because that'll kind of get you, I think, into the zone for the book, ultimately. So maybe start with that. I'm going to quote a little bit of it because I think they did a good job summing it up. So George Lewis says, the book's title is an allusion to the 1993 confirmation hearing of the former Director of Central Intelligence, James Woolsey, during which he said the United States had defeated a large dragon in the Soviet Union. But we live now in a jungle filled with a bewildering variety of poisonous snakes, referring to the wide array of state and non-state actors threatening U.S. interests, right? And I'll finish the quote. In a lot of ways, the dragon was easier to keep track of, right? And that quote has informed how the intelligence community has done business since 1993, right? What that Director of Central Intelligence said. So the book report goes on, George Lewis goes on, saying, Kilcullen draws analogies from biology, ecology, psychology to explain how countries, the dragons, and the non-state actors, the snakes, learn from failure and adapt to new circumstances. So it's an analogy, right? It's a metaphor. He largely focuses on Russia, China, and several militant groups, mostly in the Islamic world, while sadly only briefly discussing Iran. As we record this 24 hours ago.
Some stuff happened.
Some stealth bombers flew around the world and dropped some ordnance. It was a good time.
Did the thing with the thing. Yeah.
Did the things, right? Well, sadly, only briefly discussing Iran and North Korea, which he labels the little dragons. So kind of dismissive of, honestly, some of the bigger problem makers that we have in the world. Book report goes on, says the non-state actors Kilcullen examines have robustly evolved since 9/11. He illustrates how some are taking advantage of off-the-shelf consumer electronics that the West has proliferated, including Google Earth, GPS sensors, phones, tablets, hobby drones, which they've used to create sophisticated artillery targeting systems and lethal airstrike capabilities. They have also learned that, in spite of sophisticated Western signals intelligence, SIGINT capabilities, it's still possible to hide in the noise of the enormous volume of communications data being generated every moment, Kilcullen alleges. Funny, CIA is writing this. Like, well, maybe not. Maybe go fuck yourselves.
Noise-ish. Yeah.
He also claims that in order to minimize the impact of Western air superiority, most groups have learned to avoid concentrating forces, because that'll kill you, decentralize leadership, and in some cases even operate underground. Right? So I think that's a good primer for what this book talks about and is about. So their review, actually, I thought did a brilliant job just summing it up, which is an awful lot of what you have to do as an intelligence analyst is exactly that. So we're stealing it.
Yeah. Swoop. So Jim and I read different books, and a lot of these things that we talk about, we draw from the things that we've learned and read from different places. So I have not read the book, but I've read obviously Jim's notes on it, and I've read the CIA book report review thing that we're talking about. One of the things that stood out to me as it relates to the book review from the CIA, specifically, it talks about how adversaries have adapted their way of fighting our primacy in conventional warfare and warfighting capability. And I think that's significant. If you're a student of Boyd and the OODA loop and you go down that rabbit hole, one of the things that you'll come across is one of Boyd's work called The Patterns of Conflict. And he talks about a lot of patterns, right? He went back as far as he could to study warfare and conflict in general to look at what the patterns were. And one of the things that he discusses is the way that history has demonstrated how underfunded and ill-equipped forces have overcome significant opponents. So if you think about like guerrilla warfare, even like the Revolutionary War, right? Like if you think about the colonists in the 1700s wanting to overcome the British Empire or whatever, that was a pretty big undertaking. Like a bunch of farmers with pitchforks, basically, right? But the principles of guerrilla warfare and these like insurgency type efforts align really well with what we're talking about here. And it's important that we take note that in a time where it's politically popular to avoid a big conflict that would be called World War III, we're going to entertain these like other levels of military operations. But at the end of the day, it's still warfare, right? Like we're still fighting. We're just not maybe calling it that. And I think that's kind of the direction that we're headed with some of this.
Yeah. So I like that. I think that that's an important lens to look at it is through what I also consider like the OODA loop's a huge part of fighting and how organisms fight. Speaking of organisms, if I were writing the book report on this, I would start with the biology analogy that Kilcullen uses a lot. And so think about like antibiotics, right? Why don't you want to overuse antibiotics? Because at some point, antibiotics leave some germs alive. Those germs adapt and become more resistant to antibiotics, and then you can find yourself overwhelmed by those germs, right?
Yeah, the bug can evolve to fight again, like to learn how to survive, right? Like,
yeah,
evolutionary basic stuff.
Yeah, and so consider in counterinsurgency, if you kill half of the insurgents, the other half are gonna learn. the smart ones live, and consider in crime, right? If you arrest half the guys, and by the way, you arrest them, they go in and out of the criminal justice system. They learn too, right? So he makes quite a few points that I think military people need to pay attention to, and I think law enforcement and civilians should pay attention to it because I think there's something there. Okay.
I think that's a big deal because if you look at the ways that even the military has become if you look through the lens of like counterinsurgency, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the way the military had to become a lot more police-like. Like there was still a lot of like community building, hearts and minds, right? Like we couldn't just go in there with our might and like force feed this to on some level. We had to like win people over, right? And there's been a lot of discussion about the militarization of law enforcement, but I think it's interesting. There hasn't been a lot of discussion about the
policization of the military.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and however you want to describe that, and so like the crossover in all of that, I think, is beneficial for both elements.
Yeah, and 10,000 years ago, it wouldn't have mattered because we'd go into some other country, we'd kill all the men and sell all the women to slavery, and like that's just how it would be, right? You don't leave any survivors. You sow salt into the earth, and nothing ever grows in Carthage ever again, right? So when I consider his points, the things that I would kind of rattle off is it starts with this concept of evolutionary pressure. And I know evolution is like a trigger term for some of our listeners. Whether you believe in evolution or not, evolution believes in you, right? Whether you believe in a big picture doesn't matter. What matters is in a population, survivors adapt or perish, honestly, right? And counterterrorism campaigns specifically put pressure on groups, put pressure on terror groups, insurgent groups, and so they have to adapt or they will perish, right? So those groups are going to get smarter. They're going to come back stronger because we are going to kill or capture the dumb ones. Now consider that in the context of gangs, cartels, all that stuff, right? One of the things we have taught them is to work just under the threshold for where we will respond. And the term Kilcullen uses for this, I'm gonna reintroduce this as we talk, but liminal warfare. So if you think the term subliminal is like messaging hidden inside of a text or inside of a song or something like that, where you don't quite know what's happening, liminal is right at the edge for where you know it's happening. Whereas like anything past that is like conscious. Okay. So he uses the term liminal warfare or threshold warfare. So the bad guys figured out that we see war in kind of binary terms. Either we're dropping bombs on you or we're not. So they, both the countries and the non-state actors, figured out to just like stay below that line, stay below the threshold.
Piss us off just enough.
Yeah. Or just below the attribution threshold. Like maybe I did something to you, maybe I didn't. You can't prove it. Right? Or just below the retaliation threshold of, I did something to you, but are you really going to start a war over it? Probably not. You're probably sick of fighting in the Middle East. Ha ha ha. Joke's on you. We love fighting in the Middle East. Okay. So Kilcullen calls all of that liminal warfare. And funny thing, I used that term at work last week, and one of my senior NCOs looked at me like I had a dick growing out of my head. He's like, sir, actually, I don't think he actually called me sir. He's like, Jim, really, right?
The what?
Yeah. And he's like, we already have a word for that. It's called low intensity conflict. And like, yeah, but sometimes this is even lower than that, right? Sometimes we're just interfering with each other, just putting some sand in the gas tanks, right?
Yeah, it's the asymmetric part too.
Yeah. So there actually are lots of terms for this. Asymmetric warfare is one of those terms. Active measures is one of those terms. Gray zone, hybrid warfare, left of bang, preparation of the environment. All of those things could be described as liminal warfare, but the term liminal is on purpose because it describes, like I said, right at the edge for where you can kind of recognize that there's some fighting going on and that you're in it. Okay. And I also think that applies to law enforcement. Think about, I don't know what the threshold in California is for where it goes from like a misdemeanor to a felony to shoplift, but my understanding is it's quite high. Right? You can steal a lot of stuff before it's actually a felony. So do you think maybe that has had an influence on crime in California? Right? The dirtbags know, probably better than you do, what calls you're not going to prioritize. And that kind of relates back to that blasted broken windows theory we talked about recently, right?
The thing with the thing. Yeah. So one of the things, someone asked me recently if we were going to go to war with the whole Iran-Israel thing, right? Like, they're like, hey, do you think we're going to war? Like, is this going to be a thing? And side note, like, I gave kind of my answer and they were like, yeah, but what's Jim think? Which is funny. It's fair because Jim's a smart guy. It's also my primary source for a lot of that sort of conversation anyway. So it's safe to say that whatever response I would give is probably at least on some level aligned with what I think Jim would tell me. But are we going to war? ? Like, that is the sort of binary thinking that gets us in trouble, right? Like, define war. Are we going to war, quote unquote? Well, are we talking Congress approves a declaration of war? Like, define that a little bit, right? Are we going to bomb some stuff? Well, turns out.
I do that all the time. That's a Tuesday.
Yeah. We're going to bomb some shit, but that's is that war?
Yeah. Well, this comes up with do we have boots on the ground?
Right.
Well, hang on. Are we talking combat boots? Or are we talking Merrills? Because we got a lot of Merrills all over the world. That's not boots on the ground, right? Loas, yes.
Yeah. So are we going to send some people to some places to do some things, and maybe you'll hear about them and maybe not? I mean, it's become, and this is important, right? It's a very, very important when we talk about this threshold that Jim's describing. This is a political thing, right? To avoid or exit a war. And our enemies are certainly exploiting that. They know that politically there comes a cost with bringing U.S. troops to the Middle East. And that's obviously unpopular, right? So, of course, we're going to do everything we can to avoid a quote unquote war or actually declaring war. But that doesn't mean that military operations other than war are still a thing. And kind of related to this, but shifting gears, some philosophical things that I teach to police recruits in the academy. When we do quote unquote defensive tactics, one, there's a funny wordplay happening here because there's very little about defensive tactics in law enforcement that's actually defensive. If you think about it, we're playing offense a lot of the time.
You're not that's my purse, I don't know you. No, you're not doing that. You're putting a guy in handcuffs.
Yeah, no, I'm going after the guy. I'm the one playing offense in a big way. Yeah. Now, granted, I want to teach people to, while they do that, protect themselves. So there's a defensive element of that, but there's a wordplay there, right? On paper these days, at least around my parts, we're calling DT or defensive tactics. We're actually calling that arrest and control tactics, which is probably more accurate and appropriate. But it leads me kind of into this like second thing, which is one of the hardest parts about use of force in law enforcement is the ambiguity piece, right? Like when the suspect is, when we're on this like kind of like, do this. And he's like, but why? Why are you stopping me? Why am I being detained? And we're kind of in this back and forth, and it's very unclear exactly how this is going to go. That's the scary part, really. Once the guy throws a punch, now the rules became really, really clear and really, really simple. Okay, we're playing that game. Like, whoop his ass.
Yeah, I love it when they make it that clear.
Yeah,
right?
like if the bad guy is going to make it easy for me, like now I know what game we're playing, and the rules just got a lot more clear, right? It's that in-between area that's tricky. And I think that's the big thing that comes out of this like threshold idea.
Yeah, so like what's warfare? Is a cyber attack warfare? I think you'd agree. So if you cyber attack me, can I drop a bomb on you? I don't know. I like dropping bombs. Dropping bombs is easy. So this one time, a couple years ago, a criminal group affiliated with a foreign country, but not necessarily part of that foreign country, did a ransomware attack on a oil pipeline, on the billing of the oil pipeline in the southeastern United States, and effectively shut down the gas flow in the southeastern United States. That's a real attack that had a real strategic impact. Who do we bomb over that? I don't think we bombed anyone over that, right? So it was below the attribution threshold. It was below the retaliation threshold. And maybe it really was a non-state actor. Maybe it was some dude in his basement eating Cheetos and Mountain Dew. Or maybe it was like Russia or China, right? And as long as they can keep it ambiguous, they have some level of initiative advantage on that, right? So binary thinking kind of screws us. And it's funny to think, like, when we think of wars, you probably think World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, like wars, right? But we've been doing little skirmishy wars forever. There's a book called Savage Wars of Peace. There's a book called Small Wars, probably worth reading. If you think about, like, the Marine Corps song, the Halls of Montezuma and the Shores of Tripoli, do you remember that war on the Shores of Tripoli? Not the one from the 80s. I think I'm gonna tick off my Marine friends. Was it 1880s, 1780s? I don't know, but it was not the Libya raids. So binary thinking kind of screws us on use of force specifically, and it's one of the coolest little light bulb moments that you see training for defensive concealed carry. And I imagine also for police, kind of like what Mike just said. When you have a gun on your hip, it's really tempting to think of every defensive situation through the lens of like, well, I would just shoot him, right? We've talked about that on the podcast before. And when trainees start, you can see it. You can see them going for their gun before they even start using their words because they know what's coming. They know they're going to have to pull their gun out, right? So I took a course a couple of years ago, the ShivWorks ECQC course with Craig Douglas. I loved it. I thought it was a great program.
We've had him on the show. Go check out that episode.
And, you know, that whole course is where you really explore that list between harsh words and a gun, right? And consider that a bad guy has a lot of incentives to keep his behavior below your reaction threshold until the very last instant. He needs to close the distance. He needs to get you to let your guard down. He needs to get you to reach for your wallet or your cell phone, right? And, you know, bringing this full circle between personal defense and war, I recently got in a debate with a smart buddy over whether we're in World War III right now. And that's a weird debate to have. Are we in World War III? Well, I'm a child of the 80s. My picture of World War III is like the movie War Games, where, you know, we're at DEFCON 4 and all of the nuclear missiles from Russia are crossing over the poles and all the nuclear missiles from Montana and North Dakota are crossing over the poles. So I don't know. in the last 2 years, I've seen an awful lot of ballistic missiles fly around the world. Maybe not all the way around the world, but definitely around the Middle East, I've seen them. And we're still not calling that World War III. Okay, cool. And I'm not saying necessarily that we are in World War III. I'm saying that there's so much violence happening in the world right now that a couple hundred ballistic missiles can get shot and it barely makes the news. Like, the new normal of violence that we're in right now is crazy compared to, say, 5 years ago when this dude wrote this book. Okay?
Weird.
So it's a weird debate to have, but it's pretty darn important, right? You don't want to be in the middle of a war, especially not World War III, and have everybody at the table understand that except for you. Okay? If you don't know, you're playing poker, you don't know who the sucker is, guess who it is, right? So I argue that the serious regional conflicts we have right now, right? Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Iran, wherever else, and the very real potential for breakout conflict in the Western Pacific is at least as hot as the beginnings of World War I, which, by the way, started over way less. It started over one archduke. I don't even know what the fuck an archduke is. Okay? Yeah. And World War II, which had been, by the way, raging for years as two regional wars before we got involved through Pearl Harbor, right? So, and like I said, I'm not saying we're in World War III. I'm saying that, like, we're not in World War III. It's weird. It's liminal. It's like right at the edge of where you know it's happening, right? So another lesson that I think is really important from Kilcullen, or I don't know that he necessarily said it, but it's a lesson I take from him, is stop giving the enemy a turn. Let me say that again. Stop giving the enemy a turn. This happens both tactically and strategically. And Boyd would tell you not to do that. Warden would tell you not to do that. Sun Tzu would tell you not to do that. He'd say it in a fortune cookie, but he would say it. We, especially we Westerners, we Americans, we culturally want to take a turn and then see what the other guy's going to do. Right? That's just polite. That gives him time to recover from whatever you just did and to hurt you. Fuck that. If you're going to do that, you do it very purposefully. You do it with big, heavy backup as part of a orchestrated de-escalation strategy. But if you're in a serious fight, right, one like existential, you have to win or you're going to die, or he's going to beat your head into the curb kind of thing, you cannot give the adversary time to recover. You parallel your attack and you keep attacking. That's like video games. You do the combo, you get more points. You keep doing the combo. Uno, reverse. Gotcha. Right? You keep attacking. Okay. I'm a student of Desert Storm, right? I was in the 4th grade when it kicked off. And the war planners for Desert Storm, like their whole mantra was not repeating Vietnam, right? We learned our lesson from Vietnam. Stay out of Vietnam. One of the big air campaigns from Vietnam was Rolling Thunder, and they called it Rolling Thunder on purpose. The idea was that we were steadily upping the pressure on the North Vietnamese. It was neat. It was a big bombing campaign, but it did not work, right? How did Vietnam end? I don't really understand it either, okay? So the Desert Storm planners, they intentionally named their air campaign Instant Thunder. There was nothing rolling about it. They wanted everything to happen everywhere all at once, right? That is tough from an air perspective. For a lot of reasons, it's tough. We only have so many airplanes. We only have so many bombs. So we need to make sure that those bombs are hitting exactly the right targets in exactly the right sequence. We like to work at night because we have a lot of advantages at night, right? We also have to reset. Right, we got to refuel and rearm the jets. The pilots need sleep and manicures. There's this whole system. We have to maintain those jets, right? So we naturally, the U.S. Air Force and most Air Forces tend to fall into this like 24-hour cycle. We call it the ATO cycle, Air Tasking Order cycle. But that can be dangerous if it gives the enemy a break, right? I drop all my bombs. Now what are you going to do? Well, that gives you time to hide anything that didn't get bombed. That gives you time to shoot anything that didn't get bombed. That gives you time to do a lot of things to me. I don't want you to do things to me. I want you scared, blind, paralyzed, and dying. That's my job as an air planner, right?
So this hits on a couple of areas related to law enforcement and use of force stuff. And granted, we're talking, I mean, when we say World War III, that's obviously a much grander scale than some cop getting in a fight on a shoplifting call, right?
I'll tell you what, it's funny about that. I think about this with disaster planning. Like, are we planning for the end of the world? Well, kinda, right? If that guy in front of the Circle K beats your head into the curb, that's the end of your world. That is the end of the world for you, right? So when you're an existential threat, that's your time to shine.
Yeah. But I think, like, philosophically, just to help, I guess, distill this down into some lessons that I think are relevant. One thing that I try to help new cops understand is that, number one, we're not in the business of fair fights. Like, the whole idea behind rule of law and lawful authority and just, frankly, being an arm of the executive branch of government is that when it comes to enforcement, there's no standard that says, like, we're supposed to accept losing. That's not how this works, right? Like, you're expected just to, like, obey the law, right? Like,
well, he doesn't want to be arrested, so let's just go home.
Yeah.
Like, no.
And there's obviously, like, on the law enforcement side of it, like, there's an important moral and ethical thing that comes with that in terms of, with great power comes great responsibility. But also, in that sense, if a suspect wants to fight me, like, I am justified in overwhelming odds against him. We are not in the business of fair fights, right? If we're going to fight, like, I have all these tools to leverage in my favor. And that's on purpose, right? Now, obviously, we have to balance that with proportionality and due process and those things. Like, we can't, that doesn't mean we get to just, like, beat the shit out of people or kill somebody because, like, they didn't listen. Obviously, there's still all of that gets weighed into it. But the point is, once the actions of a person justifies, like, let's say, just as an example, if we've reached the point that I'm going to punch you in the face, I've probably justified punching you several times in the face, right? Like, I don't have to just sit there after I punch you once and take one on the chin and see what happens next. Like, wait and see. The other guy, the adversary, the suspect, the criminal offender, whatever, already got a say. We talk about how the enemy gets a vote, and that's true. And it's an important concept in OODA loop and decision making and conflict in general is initiative. We want to steer the chain of events, and it's important to recognize that there is a chain of events, not just a singular point in time. It's not static. It's not just like the fight happened right here and it was a win or a loss and that's it. Like, it's constantly moving. It's a chain of events. They feed off of each other, and even bigger than that, several events can happen at the same time and they all feed into each other. So gaining initiative is one part of winning against an adversary. And in terms of OODA loop and decision making, where I see this fall apart a lot of times for police officers, is either A, they spend too much time doing the, like, wait and see. We're like, well, let's give it more time and let's see what the bad guy does next, which is giving them way too much say in the situation. Or B, they take action and they get stuck there. They punch the guy and then they, like, keep punching the guy, or they keep saying, drop the knife, drop the knife, drop the knife, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun, instead of taking action, right? And they never reevaluate to either move to the next thing or change gears or de-escalate if that's appropriate. They've punched the guy a bunch of times and now it's time to, like, downshift and go to handcuff him because, you know, he's bleeding and unconscious, and that's fine. It's a lot easier to control someone who is unconscious than someone who's fighting you. But if they don't shift gears, then that becomes problematic, right? Like, if they don't downshift, that's a problem. So there's a balance to be had here. And like Jim is saying, it needs to be intentional and purposeful. If the guy earns getting punched, maybe that means you send a volley of punches and you overwhelm him and you don't give him a chance to react, because now it's your turn to decide what's going to happen next. But then you have to immediately move into another thing, and you have to reassess and keep that cycle moving to keep the initiative, right? The point in this is we don't just go tit for tat for somebody. Like, they punch me, I punch them, and we just see, how that pans out. Like, that's not winning. And I guess as it relates to current affairs, it will be interesting to see how that plays out with the current situation with Iran.
Learning will occur. So in a recent episode, we talked about how strategy for law enforcement has a lot to do with shaping the risk perceptions of the criminals, right? You're trying to create a reality for them that will shape their decisions. Observe, reign, decide, act, right? And if you can influence their perception about the odds they're going to get caught, or diminish the value they will get from stealing, that's probably worth your effort, your operational effort, your tactical effort, right? Anything that's going to mess with their perceptions about what risks they're taking. Now, the point of the Kilcullen book is that you are teaching your opponent. With everything you do, you are teaching them. And you need to think about what it is you're teaching them, right? In a military context, when you're there to kill the enemy, to kill the insurgents, kill the terrorists, whatever, you have to kill them faster than they can learn and adapt. And that is classic Boyd-Uda cycles, right? I think for law enforcement, this is where your friends in corrections might be a really valuable intel source. They may have a sense of what the inmates are talking about or teaching each other about, right? You have a window, maybe literally a window into them and into their discussions. You might as well take advantage of it. One key aspect is they might be learning something totally different from what you're trying to teach. We want a suspect to act a certain way, so we're going to do this, and what they're figuring out from that is to do something totally different, right? That's what you need to catch on to.
Yeah, we've talked about the model that we used to use of like ask, tell, make in law enforcement, and like the ask, tell, make thing was useful in the sense that it got people thinking about, hey, consider your options and don't just get stuck in one place. Like, at some point you might have to escalate and go to the next thing. But it also became a version of like, because I said so. And it became just like, oh, well, I done asked them once, and so it's time to just kick some ass, right? And back to some of the use of force stuff that we talked about earlier as it relates to law enforcement, and having the lines be clear, having a line in the sand, right? Or just setting boundaries, if you want to call it that. A lot of the criminal offenders have figured these things out. To Jim's point, like, I can't tell you how many times I've pointed a gun at somebody and told them to do something, and they still don't listen because they know I'm bluffing. Like, he can't shoot me for this. Like, they know, right? And now in my mind, I'm not typically pointing my gun at somebody for the purposes of like coercing or compelling them to do anything. It's more of a defensive option. Like, I want that on the table in case they try to pull a weapon, but that's not always the case for everybody. Sometimes people think that pointing a gun at somebody is going to be the thing that makes them listen. And a lot of bad guys have figured out like, they're not going to shoot me. Now, if I pull out a taser and they see that little dot, the laser pointing at them, they're like, oh, he might actually fucking tase me. Like, and that send a different message, right? It's interesting how that works. So consider that, right? And the same thing is true. Like, we see people these days get out their cell phones, right? To record, like they get their camera out and they record the cops. They try to agitate the cops. And especially true for like these cop watcher auditor groups that go around and do this as a hobby, I guess, because they literally have nothing better to do than to go around and harass the cops, which, like, I guess if that's your thing, whatever. But they know that it might generate an overreaction, or they know that it might intimidate the cops to like back down and enforce less because they're putting pressure on them, right? And that's part of it. So you have to see the way that like the things that we do and our doctrine and policies and principles and practices influence the way people react to it and then shape us in turn, right? There's another place that I see this a lot, which is the so-called like mostly peaceful protesters, right? Ferguson, George Floyd, the elections, right? Law enforcement across the country has learned to have a really hard time dealing with bright lines about quote unquote peaceful protests, right? Or civil unrest that is right on that like liminal threshold thing that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because, people show up and they want to take over the roadways and they want to march and make their statement. And the cops don't want to overreact. And so it's like, well, we'll give them a little bit, but we're still letting them break laws, right? Like there's still rule of law and they're not supposed to be able to take over the roadways, but we let them do it and we facilitate that in a lot of cases. And that's tricky because
how many broken windows are you tolerating?
Right. Yeah. Like, I mean, yeah, like people got to go to work and stuff. So, but essentially like that's where we're at is like we facilitate this on some level. And where this gets really tricky is where the actual like peaceful protesters who are trying to just make a legitimate civil statement are doing their thing and these agitators show up and things get out of hand. And then there's like these viral videos and things that all make it look crazy. And like the thing is that cat's out of the bag. Like we've lost control over how to like just have peaceful demonstrations and also rule of law at the same time. And I think that's something that law enforcement across the country is struggling to figure out how to manage. But it's I think a relatable example maybe for our non-military listeners to think about this like liminal threshold idea of like, well, where do we draw the line? Right? And like, God, that's really hard. And we're not only are we adapting, but they're adapting. And so the whole thing is fluid. And I think that's what makes it even harder.
Yeah, especially when they're trying to get you to overreact, right? Yeah. They're sort of like the old sibling game. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. Like Russia, China, they love this game, right? Taking up one salami slice at a time. Oh, yoink. I just took one more reef. Oh, yoink. I just took one more mile of Donbass region or whatever, right? So a funny example of like, are you teaching what you think you're teaching? Is a historical example. I don't actually know how historically accurate it is, but it comes up a lot in philosophy and politics is the Cobra effect or the Cobra bounty. So supposedly back in the day in Delhi, India, the British colonials were running the show and they were very proud of the fact they were running the show. And there was a problem with cobras and they were trying to win the hearts and minds of the people of India. And they said, okay, we'll handle the cobra problem. We're going to put out a bounty. And if you bring us the head or the tail or the fang or whatever of a cobra, we'll pay you some money. And that way we'll get rid of all the cobras. And there will be much rejoicing among the peasants, right? Here's the catch. The people began breeding cobras for the bounty and effectively increased the population instead of decreasing it. Now, when the government realized that the strategy had backfired, they canceled the bounty. And the cobra farmers released their snakes, leading to a larger population of wild cobras than before. So, you got to think before you institute a policy or a strategy or a tactic. That's your time when you're developing it, when you're doing your COA development or your military decision-making process, or, the consultants come in with their grand idea, or the PhDs come in with their grand idea. Someone has to sit down and say, hey, what is this teaching the population to do? What is this teaching the criminals to do? What is this teaching the insurgents or the terrorists to do? And have we thought through that? And unintended consequences, they will eat your lunch, right?
I think this idea, the Cobra effect, I hadn't heard this prior to Jim and I setting this up, but I think it's a really good way of explaining this cause and effect thing and the unintended consequences. I think the key takeaway in all of that for me is to recognize that time and events and interventions, right? The actions or the things that you do to try to affect change to a situation are not static. Like they're constantly moving and evolutionary, right? It's not just insert an action or intervention and call it good. There always has to be not only consideration for the unintended consequences, but also just basic adaptability, right? We have to monitor the effects of our actions and watch out and adjust for those unintended consequences. And I think where this becomes really difficult is from a leadership perspective. When we change a policy or tactics change, or just a change of direction in any form in like an organization or a team, right? And let's say like in a few years, it changes again. And then we go back to some version of the old way or some completely new way. Like people a lot of times really, really struggle with this, right? Like it's like, what do you mean? You just told us that we need to reduce the cobra population, so we did this bounty. And it's like, yeah, but look what happened. And so we've got to be able to like explain that well. And more importantly, culturally, we have to instill within our teams and organizations, I guess, this like sense of agility. You have to be used to and comfortable with changing directions. We have to embrace that as part of thriving in these dynamic environments that are that's like real life. Like that's just the world that we live in, right? Warfare, sure, but just business, competition in general is that way. Like we have to evolve and adapt.
I like that. If I had to kind of sum this up, distill it, it's all about you are putting pressure on a population, whether that's insurgents, terrorists, criminals, whoever. You're putting pressure on a population. Anytime you do that, the population, the survivors of that population, are going to adapt or they're going to perish, right? So they are changing, they are learning. Think about how they're changing. Think about what you are teaching them, right? And make sure that you are influencing them in that way. I told you when we started that this book came out in 2020. I want you to think about what the world looked like way back in the day in 2020, 5 years ago. Okay. We were still in Afghanistan. Russia had done a little incursion into eastern Ukraine in 2014, but they hadn't done that full-up invasion yet. That was still to come. The mass murder of Israelis on October 7th by Hamas hadn't happened yet. So consider how the world has changed and consider what he got right and what he didn't. And I think if you talk to anyone who has any expertise in the Russia-Ukraine business, the cycle of adaptation about like drone tactics, it is weeks and sometimes days how fast they're changing what they're doing, because the survivors know they have to keep changing to survive, right? So if you're fighting Russia in an existential fight, leave as few survivors as you can, right? If you're fighting ISIS, we don't want to leave we don't want to leave anything left. Like do the whole antibiotic regime until there's nothing left, right? Going back to the biology metaphor. So I think there's value here. I think I don't know that everyone needs to run out and read the Kilcullen book. I think it's worth checking him out. Check out a YouTube video of him. I think at minimum reading that little 2-page CIA book report, we'll link to it in the show notes. It's 2 pages. You got this. Even my cop friends can read a 2-page book report. Do it. And I think you'll get the essence, and maybe it'll inspire you to go find the book, and maybe you'll be like, okay, well, that was cool. Now I'm going to go catch guys, stealing catalytic converters, which is fine. But maybe you'll think about, maybe we taught them to do that. Maybe we can teach them to do something else, right? So that's what we want to do. Put a little bug in your brain. With that, I think that's all I got. Mike, you got anything?
No, I think, like I said, this is a big strategic idea that we're talking about here, as it relates to just like philosophical warfare doctrine type stuff But I think it does apply like tactically when let's use your example of catching guys with the catalytic converters or shoplifting and retail theft. They're learning when the county attorney or the district attorney doesn't prosecute under a certain threshold, what they can get away with and what they can't. They're learning that when they have the keys to the stolen car, they can come up with a defense to why they have the stolen car. Like, they're learning little things like that. You have to like see the big picture on that, I think. And I don't like the way that goes politically sometimes. Like, it can be frustrating when, you're trying to deal with a guy who has done wrong and you're trying to apply justice and someone wants to make some counter argument and be like, well, what if? And you're like, come on, dude, really? But at the end of the day, like, be better than the bad guy. Like, outsmart them, outwit them. That's where we need the critical thinking in those things. So apply it.
I want to talk real quick about Israel-Iran stuff. So think about, what have we taught Iran? What has Israel taught Iran? Iran has shot, like I said, many at this point, salvos of ballistic missiles at Israel. Basically nothing gets through due to incredible work by the Israelis, by the American defense assets that support them. So if they learn that ballistic missiles don't work, what are they going to try instead? What are we teaching them? Okay. Is it drones? Is it an active shooter Mumbai type scenario? Is it another October 7th type scenario? So consider when you disable one of those attack vectors, what you're doing is you're convincing them to switch attack vectors. So expect that they're going to switch attack vectors. Think about it. And also consider that it's always more fun to be on the attack than to have to defend. Right? It's more fun for America to be on the attack. It's more fun for the Iranians, for them to be on the attack. It's all fun and games until we start taking pixels out of the sky with little stealthy guys. So understand that. Like, it's fun when you're on the attack, but then they're gonna take a turn at some point, and you need to be ready for them to take a turn. My advice: don't leave any left to take a turn. Right? It's easy to say, it's hard to do, but here we are. That's warfare, baby. All right. Be safe out there. Be smart out there. We'll see you on the flip side.
All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by 09 Holsters. We talk a lot about people, ideas, and hardware on this show, so when we invest in equipment, we always think in terms of experience first. 09 is helping you figure out how to carry the gear you need to be effective. They are built by cops, for cops, with a minimalist design and bomb-proof durability. Radio cases, flashlights, body cameras, even canine remotes, you name it, 09 has been filling a void in tactical duty holsters for more than a decade. Go see what they offer at 09 Holsters, that's ZERO, the number 9, holsters.com. 09, built to win the fight.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by Manus X. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with Manus X. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com.
Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.